The courthouse in Henrico County smelled like floor polish and old paper, the kind of smell that settled into a man's clothes and stayed there for hours after he'd gone home. Lorraine Hadley sat on a wooden bench outside courtroom 4B, her hands folded in her lap, her purse balanced on her knees like a small, obedient animal. She was 58 years old. She had been married for 33 years, and in about 20 minutes, she would not be married anymore. Outside the tall windows, March rain came down in slow, steady sheets, turning the parking lot into a gray mirror. Somewhere down the hall, a woman was crying softly, and somewhere else, a man was laughing too loud, and Lorraine sat between those sounds and felt nothing. The crying did not move her. The laughing did not bother her. She had cried herself empty 6 weeks ago in the guest bedroom of the house on Briar Creek Lane, alone, with the door locked, and there was nothing left inside her to spill out now. The bailiff opened the door and called her case. She stood up. Her knees ached the way they had started to ache in the last year or two, and she set one hand on the bench to steady herself. Then she walked into the courtroom alone. Roland Hadley was not there. His chair was empty. His side of the table was empty. There was only his attorney, a tall man named Hartwell, who wore a charcoal suit and a watch that probably cost more than the truck Lorraine had driven here in. Hartwell did not stand when she entered. He did not nod. He glanced at her the way a man glances at a piece of furniture being delivered to the wrong room, then went back to his papers. Lorraine sat down where the bailiff pointed. The judge read the settlement into a microphone that made his voice sound like it was coming through a tin can in some other room. Lorraine listened to her marriage being divided into bullet points. The house on Briar Creek Lane, Roland. The retirement accounts, Roland. The investment portfolio, Roland. The vehicles, Roland, with one exception. The 2006 Ford pickup, currently driven by Mrs. Hadley, would remain with Mrs. Hadley. That was generous of him, Hartwell murmured. Lorraine did not look at him. There was one more item, a real property located on Route 11, Goshen County, Virginia, a small parcel of land with a structure described in the assessment as a former filling station and attached service bay valued at approximately $14,000. That property had passed to Mrs. Hadley through her late father's will in 2014, and Mr. Hadley had elected not to contest it. The property would remain with Mrs. Hadley. The judge asked if she agreed. Lorraine said yes. Hartwell pushed papers across the table. She signed where he pointed, 4 signatures, 2 initials. The pen was cheap and dry, and on the 3rd signature, it skipped, leaving a small bare patch in her name. She did not ask for a different pen. She finished signing with the bad one. Hartwell collected the papers, tapped them on the table to square the edges, and slid them into a folder. Then, for the first time, he looked at her. His eyes were the color of weak tea. He smiled with the lower half of his face only. "Mr. Hadley sends his regards," he said. "He's unfortunately out of the country today. Travel that couldn't be rescheduled." Lorraine knew where Roland was. She had seen the booking confirmation on his laptop 2 months ago before she understood what she was looking at. A resort on Eleuthera. 2 guests. He had been booking it the same week he told his lawyer to start the paperwork. "Tell him I said goodbye," Lorraine said. Hartwell's mouth twitched. He had not expected her to speak. He nodded once, picked up his briefcase, and left the courtroom without another word. The door swung shut behind him with a soft click. She sat in the empty room for a long moment, listening to the rain. Outside in the corridor, a clerk handed her a manila folder containing copies of everything she had just signed. The clerk was a young woman with kind eyes and the practiced gentleness of someone who handed manila folders to strangers all day long. She told Lorraine to take care. Lorraine said she would. Then she walked down the long hallway past the crying woman and the laughing man, past the bailiff, who held the door for her and out into the gray afternoon. The cardboard box was waiting on the passenger seat of the Ford. Roland had left it on the kitchen counter 3 days ago with a yellow sticky note that said, "Your things." 33 years packed into a single box. A jewelry box that had belonged to her mother, a photo album from her daughter Bridget's childhood, a chipped coffee mug that said "World's Best Mom," a folded scarf she could not remember owning, her wedding ring, which she had taken off the morning she found out about Eleuthera, sat on top of the pile in a small velvet pouch. She did not put the ring on. She set the folder on top of the box. She started the truck. The engine coughed twice and caught. The Ford was 19 years old. The dashboard was cracked from a decade of summer sun, and the passenger door stuck unless you pulled the handle just right. Roland had bought it for a landscaper who quit after 2 weeks, and it had sat in the driveway gathering pollen until Lorraine started using it for errands. When the divorce papers were drafted, Roland had told Hartwell she could keep it. He had used the word generous. Hartwell had written it down. Lorraine sat behind the wheel and watched the rain run down the windshield. She had nowhere to go. The house on Briar Creek was Roland's now officially, although it had stopped being hers years before the papers were signed. $211 sat in a checking account that would soon have only her name on it. She had no apartment, no job, no friends who weren't really Roland's friends, the kind of friends who had stopped calling the week the rumors started and would never call again. She had a cardboard box and a Ford and a deed. She pulled the deed out of the folder. The paper was old soft at the edges from years in a file drawer. Pruitt Gas and Service, Route 11, Goshen County, deeded to Lorraine Ann Hadley, pursuant to the last will and testament of Harlan Robert Pruitt, deceased. Harlan Pruitt, her father. He had been gone for 12 years now. The station had been closed all that time since the August afternoon his neighbors found him slumped at his own counter with a crossword puzzle in front of him and his reading glasses still on. Lorraine had driven down for the funeral. She had spent 3 days sorting through his things, locked the door behind her, and never gone back. Roland had said the property wasn't worth the taxes. Lorraine had not argued. She never argued with Roland about money, about decisions, about anything. That was the deal, although nobody had ever said it out loud. He earned, she agreed, for 33 years. She put the deed back in the folder. She set the folder on top of the cardboard box. She turned the wheel and pulled out of the courthouse parking lot, and she pointed the Ford south toward the mountains. The drive took just over 4 hours. The interstate gave way to 2-lane highway. The 2-lane highway gave way to a county road that wound through tobacco country and small towns with names that sounded like the names of someone's grandfather. The county road gave way to Route 11, a ribbon of cracked asphalt that climbed into the Blue Ridge through tunnels of oak and hickory. The trees were still bare from winter branches, black and wet against a sky the color of pewter, but the buds were just starting to swell. Spring was getting ready to come up the mountain. About halfway up, she stopped for gas at a clapboard service station with a hand-painted sign and a hound dog asleep on the porch. She filled the tank and walked inside to pay. The man behind the counter was about her age, with a beard going gray and kind, tired eyes. He took her cash and gave her change, and as she turned to leave, the door swung open and a second man walked in. He was in his early 60s in a fleece jacket and good boots, and Lorraine recognized him before he recognized her. Drew Pickering. He had worked with Roland years ago at the development firm before he'd gone out on his own. He and his wife had come to their Christmas parties for a decade. He stopped when he saw her, and his face did something complicated. "Lorraine," he said. "Drew, He glanced around the small store as if hoping someone else might walk in and rescue him. "I heard about, I'm sorry." "Thank you. You headed somewhere." "My father's place," she said. Up the mountain. Drew nodded too quickly. He was a man who had been forced into a conversation he did not want, and his discomfort was making him careless. He laughed a short, awkward laugh and shook his head. You know what Rollins told me last time we played golf? He said, Drew, give her 6 months. She'll come crawling back. She doesn't know how to boil water without me. Drew chuckled, then heard himself, and the laugh died in his throat. His face went pale. I mean, he was joking, obviously. He didn't mean. Lorraine looked at him. She did not blink. She did not speak. She just looked at him, and Drew Pickering, 58 years old, a grown man with 2 grandchildren, stopped talking and looked at the floor. Tell him I won't be crawling, Lorraine said. She walked out of the store and back to the truck. She sat behind the wheel with the keys in her hand, and she did not start the engine for a full minute. The rain had stopped. The hound dog on the porch lifted its head, looked at her, and lay back down. She had known Roland was unfaithful. She had figured out that part on her own 8 months ago when she'd stayed up late one night and opened the laptop he'd left on the kitchen island. She had known he had lied to her repeatedly about where he was on Thursday evenings. She had known he had quietly moved money out of their joint accounts the way a man hides cards up his sleeve. But she had not known he despised her. She had not understood until this moment, standing at a gas station counter in the foothills, that the man she had spent 33 years of her life with had been laughing about her on golf courses, that he had not just chosen another woman over her. He had decided she was something to be left behind, a thing whose helplessness was a punchline. Lorraine started the truck. She drove the rest of the way up the mountain. She did not cry. She did not pull over. She drove with both hands on the wheel and her jaw set, and somewhere around the 3rd switchback, something inside her chest that had been collapsed for a very long time began very slowly to straighten up. She remembered Route 11 from summers as a girl. Her mother used to drive her up at the start of June and leave her with Harlan for 2 months at a stretch. Lorraine had learned to pump gas and make change and check oil before she'd learned long division. By the time she was 9, her father had put a wrench in her hand and showed her how to break loose the lug nuts on a stuck tire. By 12, she could change a fan belt on her own. He'd taught her to listen to engines, to read tire tread, to tell from the sound of a starter motor whether the problem was the battery or the alternator. Roland had found that charming when they were dating. Later, he'd found it embarrassing. The wife of a man who built shopping centers should not know how to bleed brake lines. He had never told her to stop. He had just stopped asking. And eventually, she had stopped doing the way you stop doing anything when the person closest to you pretends it does not exist. The road curved around a granite outcrop near the top of the ridge, and there it was, Pruitt Gas and Service. She pulled into the cracked apron and shut the engine off, and she sat for a long minute, looking through the windshield. The building was smaller than she remembered. It always was. A single-story cinder block structure with a flat roof and 2 pump islands out front. The pumps were locked, rusted, their price displays frozen on numbers from another decade. Kutsu had climbed the south wall, threading through the cinder blocks and reaching up toward the roof. The sign above the front door had been hand-painted by Harlan himself in 1976, dark green letters on cream, and the paint had faded to ghosts. One of the front windows had a crack running corner to corner, sealed with duct tape that had long since dried to brittle yellow strips. The building was standing. The walls were solid. The door, when she tried it, was locked. She found the ring of keys in the manila folder. The second one fit. The lock resisted, then turned with a gritty click that sounded like something deep in the wood waking up. The smell hit her first. Stale air, dust, the faintest ghost of motor oil and old coffee, and underneath that, something older still, something she had not realized she remembered. The smell of her father. Late afternoon light came through the dirty windows in pale rectangles across the concrete floor. The shelves behind the counter, once full of candy bars and road maps and small bottles of brake fluid, were nearly empty now. Just a few items left, scattered a tin of bag balm, a curled paperback, a deck of playing cards. The mechanical cash register sat in the center of the wooden counter drawer, slightly open, the kind with real buttons that punched up small numbered tabs in a glass window. And beside the register, exactly where he had left them, sat Harlan's reading glasses, wire frames, one temple slightly bent from the time he'd sat on them in 1998. Lorraine had laughed at him for a week about that. Beside the glasses lay a folded newspaper. The Goshen Valley Tribune opened to the crossword puzzle. The date in the corner read August 17th, 2014. 27 down was filled in. 28 down was blank. He had died with the pen in his hand. Lorraine picked up the glasses. The lenses were filmed with 12 years of dust. She cleaned them on the hem of her shirt, a motion her hands remembered without consulting her, the same motion she had performed 1,000 times as a girl when Harlan had misplaced them for the third time in an afternoon. She set them back on the counter exactly where they had been. She did not move the newspaper. She walked through the rest of the building slowly, the narrow staircase to the apartment above, the little kitchen with its two-burner stove, the bed with its bare mattress where Harlan had slept alone for the last 20 years of his life after her mother died, the bathroom with its medicine cabinet still stocked with his toothbrush and a bottle of aspirin expired 8 years past. Through the small bedroom window, the Blue Ridge spread out in folds of gray and blue ridgeline, behind ridgeline fading to a horizon she had forgotten the look of. She came back downstairs as the light was beginning to drain. She sat behind the counter on the wooden stool Harlan had used for 40 years, and she put her hands flat on the wood. The surface was worn smooth where his elbows had rested. She ran her thumb along the edge of the counter and felt every scratch and dent that decades of customers had left behind, and her thumb stopped on something she had not noticed before, a seam, straight and deliberate. She knelt down behind the counter. There was a panel below the register about 2 feet square, fitted flush against the wall, not nailed, not glued, just fitted the way a man would fit something he might need to open again. She worked her fingernails into the edge and pulled. The panel came away with a dry, soft scrape. There was a shallow cavity in the wall behind it. Inside the cavity were 3 things: a leather journal, thick and soft, the cover worn dark where fingers had gripped it, for many years held closed with a brown rubber band, a small metal lock box, the cheap kind from a hardware store, and a bundle of envelopes, 8 of them tied together with kitchen twine. Lorraine sat down on the cold concrete floor and she lifted the journal out. She slid the rubber band off. It broke as it came free, dry from age, and the journal opened almost on its own to the first page, her father's handwriting. She had not seen it in 12 years. Small, careful block letters, slanting just slightly to the right. The same letters that had labeled every tool in his repair bay, every drawer in his filing cabinet, every box in his pantry. Looking at it now was like hearing his voice in a room she thought was empty. The first entry was dated September 14th, 1981. Lent Tom Hendricks $200 for the electric bill. Wife is due in March and they can't afford to lose heat. Told him to pay when he can. He won't be able to, but that's all right. She turned the page. Fixed Carol Dunbar's transmission. Charged her $30 for parts, nothing for labor. She's raising 3 kids alone since Ray left. The oldest one helped me sweep the bay while Carol waited. Good kid. Quiet. She turned the page again. Gave Morris Sutter $50 toward a new roof for the south side of his trailer. He thinks it's the insurance. Don't tell him. Lorraine stopped reading. She closed the journal and held it against her chest, and she sat on the concrete floor of her father's gas station and listened to the silence. When she had been a girl, she had known her father as a quiet man who fixed cars. He pumped gas, he drank coffee from a green thermos, he played Thursday night cards with 3 other men whose names she barely remembered. He went to bed at 9 and rose at 5. That was Harlan Pruitt as far as she had ever known him. The man who fixed cars. She opened the journal again. She read for an hour. The light failed, and she switched on the desk lamp by the register, and the lamp threw a small yellow circle across the wooden counter and her father's handwriting, and she kept reading. There were hundreds of entries. They spanned 33 years from that first September in 1981 right up to the last week of his life. Loans, repairs done at cost or for free, bags of groceries left in the beds of trucks while their owners weren't looking, a widow whose oil tank he kept full all through one bad winter and who never knew where the oil was coming from, a teenage boy whose tuition at the community college he had paid for in cash, 2 installments anonymously through the registrar's office. He had kept track of every family in the valley, not their debts, their needs. He had noted when children were born and when men lost jobs and when roofs needed patching. He tracked the loans some people paid back, and he quietly, deliberately, year after year, forgave the ones they could not. He had never told a single soul as far as she could tell, not her mother, not her, not the men he played cards with on Thursday nights. The middle of the journal, around 1995, had a stretch of pages where the entries were shorter, the handwriting slightly less steady. Lorraine knew that year. Her mother had been sick. Harlan had spent the last 6 months of his wife's life driving her to a hospital 2 hours away, 3 times a week, and somehow in the cracks between those drives, he had kept the station open and the journal going. The entries from those months were all small: $20 to one family, a free oil change for another, a bag of apples left on someone's porch. He had been losing his wife. He had not stopped looking out for his valley. Lorraine closed her eyes for a long time. When she opened them again, she opened the lockbox. Inside was $412 in old soft bills, a second ring of keys, 4 of them, none of which she recognized, and a folded document that turned out to be the original deed to the station transferred from Harlan's father to Harlan in 1971. She set the contents on the floor beside the journal. She untied the twine on the bundle of envelopes. There were 8 of them, each one addressed in a different hand, all of them to Harlan Pruitt, Route 11, Goshen County. She opened them one at a time. They were thank you notes, some written on lined notebook paper, some on the back of receipts, one on the inside of a torn brown grocery bag. Simple letters, halting words. People who did not write often trying to write down what a man's quiet kindness had meant to them. Mr. Pruitt, you don't know me, but I am Linda Hendricks' daughter. She told me before she passed that you kept our farm. I just wanted you to know it is still ours. My boy is going to take it over next year. Earl told us to pay him back when we could, and we never could, and I am sorry, but I think he knew that. He is the reason there is a Christmas in our house this year. You bought my boy his books. He doesn't know. He thinks his grandmother sent the money. I want him to keep thinking that. But I am writing this so somebody will know what you did. 8 letters, 8 families, and those were only the ones who had figured out where the help had come from. Lorraine tied the twine back around the envelopes. She set them carefully beside the journal. She put the lockbox down, and then she sat very still on the floor of her father's gas station with the desk lamp throwing its small yellow circle over a counter that had once seemed to her like nothing but a counter, and she understood for the first time who Harlan Pruitt had been. He had not just been pumping gas for 40 years. He had been holding an entire valley together with his bare hands, one small kindness at a time, and he had never said a word about it to anyone, not even to his own daughter. She did not cry. The crying was finished. What she felt now was bigger than tears. It was the feeling of standing in a room you have walked through your entire life and realizing the room has another door, and the door has been open the whole time, and you simply never turned your head. Lorraine put her hand flat on the cover of the journal, and she felt the leather warm beneath her palm. She had come here to sell the place. She did not want to sell the place. She looked up. Through the front window she could see Route 11 curving down the mountain into darkness, and above the ridgeline, the first hard stars of the night were coming out, more stars than she had seen in years of suburban living. The mountain was utterly quiet. No traffic, no neighbors, no television murmuring through walls, just wind in the pines and the soft creak of a building settling at the end of a long day. She picked up the bundle of envelopes one more time because she had not finished untying the last knot. As she lifted the bundle, an envelope she had not seen slid out from underneath. It had been pressed against the bottom, hidden by the others. It was sealed. The handwriting was her father's. The envelope said one word, Lorraine. She held it for a long time before she opened it. She slid her finger under the flap, and she pulled out 2 folded sheets of yellow legal paper. She unfolded them on the counter, smoothed them flat under her hand, and she leaned into the light of the desk lamp and began to read. Dear Lorraine, if you are reading this, you found your way back. I always knew you would. I am writing this on a Tuesday in October. The leaves are turning and business is slow, which means I have too much time to think. That is dangerous for an old man. I want you to know something about this station. It is not worth much on paper. A real estate agent would call it a tear down, but it is worth everything to the people who depend on it. I do not mean the gas or the repairs, although those matter. I mean the fact that it is here, that someone is behind the counter, that the coffee is on and the light is on and the door is open. The book you found behind the panel was not for you to settle accounts. It was for somebody to know. I wrote it down because I wanted somebody to know what this place was for. I hoped that somebody would be you. But if it turned out to be nobody, that was all right too. I did what I did because somebody had to, not because it needed to be remembered. I am going to say something now that I have not been able to say to your face for 30 years. I know about Roland. I have known for a long time. You think you hit it well, sweetheart. A father sees what a father sees. I watched him at your wedding. I watched the way he looked at your mother when he thought no one was watching. I watched the way he looked at the catering staff when he thought no one was watching. He measured them. He measured everybody. He measures everything in dollars, Lorraine, and he thinks that is the same as value. It is not. He is not a bad man in the way some men are bad. He is a small man who decided a long time ago that smallness was strength. Someday you will see the difference. I hope it does not cost you too much to learn it. I should have said something. I never did. I have asked myself why 100 times. The truth is, I knew you. I knew that if I told you what I saw, you would close a door between us and you would not open it again, because that is the kind of woman my daughter is. Stubborn the way your mother was stubborn, the way I am stubborn. So I waited. I waited because I believed that if I waited long enough, you would come back to this mountain on your own. And when you did, you would not be coming home to me. You would be coming home to yourself. If you are reading this, then I was right to wait. You have not lost everything, Lorraine. I want you to hear me on this. The things he took from you were not yours. The house was not yours. The money was not yours. The friends were not yours. They were all his on loan. You spent 33 years tending a garden that belonged to somebody else. This place is yours. It was your grandfather's, and it was mine, and it is yours now. Not because it is worth money, because you are the only person I trust to understand what it was for. Don't sell it. Don't let anyone tell you it is worthless. And if you can keep the coffee on, that matters more than you think. I love you, sweetheart. I am proud of you. I have been proud of you every day of your life, including the days you did not believe it. Dad. Lorraine sat behind the counter for a long time after she finished reading. She did not cry. She folded the letter slowly with the same careful motion her father had used to fold a newspaper after he was done with the crossword. She slid it back into the envelope. She set the envelope down on the counter beside his reading glasses and the unfinished puzzle. 3 things: his glasses, his crossword, his letter. 3 things from a man who had been gone for 12 years, and the station felt more full of him now than it had felt the day she walked through the door. She got up from the stool. Her knees ached. She did not care. She walked to the front door and stood looking out at Route 11, in the dark, at the stars, over the ridgeline. The wind in the pines was the only sound in the world. Somewhere down the mountain, a single set of headlights crawled along the curve, slowed at the granite outcrop, and disappeared. She thought about Roland on a beach in Eleuthera, drinking something cold in a tall glass, telling a woman half his age about the wife he had finally gotten rid of. She thought about Drew Pickering, embarrassed in a gas station 40 miles south of here, repeating a joke that wasn't a joke. She thought about Hartwell's mouth twitching as she signed the bad pen. 6 months, Roland had said. She'll come crawling back. Lorraine Hadley, 58 years old, with $211 in her checking account and a cardboard box, in the bed of a 19-year-old truck, smiled a small, hard smile in the dark of her father's gas station. She was not going to crawl. She was going to open this place. She turned off the desk lamp. She locked the front door from the inside. She climbed the narrow staircase to the apartment above where her father had slept alone for 20 years and where her mother's wedding photograph still hung crooked on a nail above the dresser, and she lay down on the bare mattress in her clothes. The mountain was utterly quiet. The stars came in through the small window. Somewhere in the walls, a beam settled with a soft, tired creak that sounded almost like a man clearing his throat. She closed her eyes. She was 58 years old. She was broke. She was alone. For the first time in longer than she could remember, she knew exactly what she was going to do next. Lorraine woke before sunrise. The mountain was still dark, but a thin band of gray had begun to push up behind the eastern ridge, and the birds had started their first careful arguments in the trees outside the window. For a long moment, she did not move. She lay on the bare mattress in her father's old apartment, in clothes she had slept in, and she looked at the water stain on the ceiling above her head and listened to a building she had not slept in for 33 years. The building creaked. It settled. It breathed. She got up. She washed her face in the bathroom sink with water so cold it stung. There was no soap. She used her fingers and the hem of her shirt, and she stared at herself in the small clouded mirror above the basin for one long second. The woman looking back at her had gray at the temples and a hard set to her mouth she did not remember owning. The woman looking back at her was not crying. Lorraine nodded once, almost imperceptibly, at her own reflection, and she went downstairs. In the small kitchen behind the counter, she found a can of coffee in the cabinet, still sealed, the plastic lid faintly yellowed. She pried it open and smelled it, stale but not turned. The 2-burner stove caught on the 3rd try. She heated water in a dented saucepan because there was no kettle, and she ground the old coffee in the hand grinder Harlan had bought at a yard sale in 1989. The smell that rose out of that grinder, oily and dark and unmistakable, was the smell of every summer morning she had ever spent in this building as a girl. Her hands were steady. Her chest was not. She poured the coffee into a chipped mug that said Goshen County Volunteer Fire, and she carried it out onto the front apron of the station, and she watched the sun come up over the Blue Ridge. The mountain turned from black to blue to gold. She did not cry. She drank her coffee and she made a list. The list was on the back of an old gasoline receipt she had found tucked into the cash register drawer. By the time the sun cleared the ridge, the back of the receipt was full, and she had turned it over and started writing on the front. Broken window, porch railing, kudzu on the south wall, water damage where the roof met the chimney, pumps, tanks, lines, furnace, air compressor, hydraulic lift, inventory, insurance, fuel contract, signage, phone. By the time she set the receipt down, she could not see the original printing for the ink of her own handwriting, and she understood with a small private clarity that the list would take her a year, maybe two. She did not have a year. She had $211 and $412 more in the lockbox. She had a building that should not have been standing and a pair of hands she had not used for what they had been taught to do in 3 decades. She had a list. She started with the kudzu. The vine had crawled up the south wall the way slow water finds every crack in a stone. It had pushed its tendrils into the mortar between the cinder blocks, and it had reached for the roof, and the leaves were dark green and waxy and densely matted. Lorraine found a pair of leather work gloves in the repair bay, stiff from years of disuse, and she pulled them on, and she walked around to the south side of the building. She set a hand on the wall. She closed her fingers around a hank of vine, and she pulled. The first pull came away with a dry, ripping sound and a small explosion of dust. The vine had been there so long, the leaves had fused into the cinder block in places. She pulled again and again. She worked the way she had been taught to work a long time ago, the way a girl works when her father is watching from the bay door, and she will not under any circumstance let him see her quit. By mid-morning, her shoulders were on fire. By noon, her hands had blistered through the gloves, 2 raw red spots that would split open before the day was done. She kept pulling. Somewhere around 11 o'clock, a truck pulled into the apron. Lorraine did not hear it at first. She had her back to the road, and the rush of her own breathing and the dry, tearing sound of the vine had filled her ears. She only noticed when she stepped back to catch her breath and saw in the corner of her eye an old Chevy parked beside her Ford with the engine off. A man was standing on her porch. He was heavy-set, slow on his feet, and he wore a plaid flannel shirt and a cap with a feed store logo. White stubble on a jaw the color of an old saddle. He had his hands in his pockets, and he was looking at the new bare patch on the south wall where the kudzu used to be. He turned when he heard her step. His eyes widened. He took off his cap. "I'll be damned," he said quietly. "You're Harlan's girl." Lorraine pulled off the gloves and walked toward him. Her hands were shaking. She could not tell if it was the kudzu or something else. "Lorraine," she said, "Wendell Tanner." He held out a hand the size and approximate texture of a baseball mitt. "I live 2 miles down the mountain. Your daddy and me played cards every Thursday for I don't know how many years. 30 give or take." She took his hand. He shook it with the careful gentleness of a big man who has long since learned that his strength is not something other people enjoy. "I remember you," Lorraine said, and as she said it, she did. A man who used to bring corn from his garden in late August. A laugh you could hear from inside the station, even with the door closed. "Knew your mother too," Wendell said. He looked at the building, then back at her. "Haven't seen a soul at this place since Harlan passed. What brings you up?" She considered for 1 second the kinds of polite, half-true answers a woman of 58 learns to give over 33 years of being somebody's wife. Then she let them go. "My husband divorced me," she said. "He got the house. He got everything. This is all I have left." Wendell nodded. He did not say he was sorry. He did not ask a single follow-up question. He set his cap back on his head, walked to his truck, and came back with a green steel thermos and 2 ceramic mugs that had clearly traveled with him for years. "Well then," he said, "you're going to need better coffee than whatever ancient can you found in Harlan's cabinet." They sat on overturned 5-gallon buckets on the cracked apron in front of the station, and Wendell poured. The coffee in the thermos was strong enough to walk on its own. Lorraine took a long swallow and felt it scour something out of her chest. "Tell me about him," she said. "Tell me the things he didn't tell me." Wendell looked out at the ridgeline for a long time before he spoke. "Your daddy was a complicated man in a simple way," he said. "Worked hard, kept his head down, didn't talk much about himself, but he had a thing about people. Couldn't stand to see somebody struggle if he could do something about it." He paused. I found his journal. She had not asked. He had told her, and she nodded. Behind the counter, in the wall. "Stubborn old fool." Wendell shook his head, smiling. "Wrote it all down. He never told a single soul. I only ever knew because I caught him once in '97 loading 2 bags of groceries into the back seat of Morris Sutter's truck at midnight. Maurice was asleep at the wheel. Drunk, probably. Your daddy told me he was reorganizing the inventory." Lorraine laughed. The sound came out short and surprised, like something startled out of a thicket. "He would," she said. "He did." Wendell sipped his coffee. "Your daddy never turned away a soul who needed help. Said it was cheaper than church, and it did more good." He turned the mug in his hands. "Folks around here still talk about him, not in any big way. Quiet things. Somebody will mention their lights stayed on one winter because Harlan paid the bill, or that their truck made it another year because he wouldn't take their money. Adds up over 40 years. Lorraine drank her coffee. "Why didn't he tell me any of this?" she said. Wendell looked at her. His eyes were a faded blue, the color of denim that has been washed too many times. "Because Harlan didn't think it was special," he said. "He thought it was just what you did if you lived somewhere and you had 2 hands and a set of wrenches. He didn't think it needed a name on it." He paused. "He died owing nothing to anybody and being owed by everybody. He always said that was the richest a man could be." They sat for a while in silence. A pickup truck came up Route 11, slowed at the granite outcrop, and the driver lifted 2 fingers from the steering wheel in a small, lazy salute as he passed. Wendell lifted 2 fingers back. The driver did not know either of them. It was just the way a man said hello in these mountains, and Lorraine, who had forgotten this small piece of geography, felt something in her loosen. Wendell left at noon with a promise to come back the next morning. By dusk, she had filled an entire wheelbarrow with kudzu and stacked it behind the building in a pile taller than she was. Her hands were ruined. Her back was singing a song she would feel for a week. She did not care. She slept that night without dreaming. By the end of the first week, Pruitt Gas and Service had attracted what Wendell described with the dry pleasure of a man watching a slow miracle as quiet visitors. They came one at a time. A casserole was left on the front step with a note that said, "Welcome home, Harlan's daughter." A stack of split oak was piled neatly along the side wall by a man Lorraine never saw, with no note at all. A plastic tub of cleaning supplies appeared inside the front door, set down so softly she had not heard it place. A teenager dropped off a paper grocery bag, waved shyly, and drove off before Lorraine could thank her. Every gift came with the same unspoken message. "He helped us once. We are glad you are here." Lorraine cleaned. She scrubbed the counter until the grain of the wood came back through 40 years of grime. She washed the windows with newspaper and vinegar the way her mother had taught her. She painted the front door and the window trim a dark, deep green from a can she had found in the stockroom, the same color Harlan had always used, mixed at a hardware store in Lexington that had not existed for 15 years. She put a coffee maker on a small table just inside the front door in the exact spot where Harlan had kept his, and she set out a single small ceramic dish for change. The pumps were the largest problem. The underground tanks needed inspection. The pump heads themselves were relics. She called every fuel distributor within 50 miles of Goshen. Most of them hung up when she described the location, a station on a road nobody drove, by a woman with no operating history, with collateral worth $14,000 on a generous afternoon, did not justify the cost of an inspection truck. The fourth company she called was run by a man named Roy Grady. He was quiet on the phone for a long second after she said her name. Harlan Pruitt's daughter. Yes, your daddy kept my trucks running the first 3 years I was in business. Wouldn't charge me full price. Said a man trying to build something shouldn't be punished for it. A pause. I'll send a crew Tuesday. She thanked him. Don't thank me, Roy Grady said. I'm 43 years late. He sent the crew. They inspected the tanks, flushed the lines, replaced the pump heads. She signed a contract on terms that would bury her if a hard winter came and the cars did not. But she signed it. Every part of opening the station was a gamble. The signing of the fuel contract was just a louder one. On the 8th day of cleaning, she heard an engine. It was struggling. She heard the cough of it before she saw it, the kind of dry, hard cough that meant something serious was about to fail, and she stepped out of the bay where she had been wiping down the workbench, and she watched a white pickup truck limp up Route 11 with steam rising in a thin gray plume from under the hood. It rolled past her. Station slowed and stopped 20 yards past the apron. The driver's door opened. A young man climbed out. He was lean and sunburned and could not have been more than 23. He wore a gray t-shirt with grease stains across the front and jeans torn at the knee and boots that had walked a lot of bad ground. He stood for a moment beside his truck with both hands on his hips, looking at the engine the way a man looks at a problem he understands. Lorraine walked down the apron. "Radiator," she said. He looked up. His face was wary in a way that did not have anything to do with his truck. He had the face of a young man who had learned that conversations with strangers usually cost him something. "Upper hose," he said. "I got a spare in the bed, no tools." "I've got tools," Lorraine said. She tilted her head toward the open bay. "Pull it in if it'll make it that far." He looked at the bay. He looked at her. She watched him do the small private math of a person who has been told no in too many parking lots. "I can pay for the bay time," he said. "I didn't ask for money. I said pull it in." His name was Tobin Merrick. "Toby," he said when she asked. He drove his truck into the bay on a wheeze and a prayer, propped the hood, and had the bad hose off in 6 minutes. Lorraine pulled a replacement from the stockroom that was close enough to fit with a couple of extra clamps, and she watched him install it. She watched his hands. He had the hands of a person who had been taught early, the same hands she remembered her father having. The motions were small and unfussy, and there was no wasted effort in any of them. He tightened the clamps with the relaxed precision of a man tying his own shoe. When he reached for a tool, he did not look at the workbench. He knew where the tool would be. "Where'd you learn to wrench?" she said. "My grandmother's boyfriend had a shop up in Boone. I spent every summer there till I was 16. He tightened the last clamp and stepped back. "Haven't worked in a shop in a long time. Last 3 places I tried didn't work out." Lorraine did not ask why. She could see enough in the way he held himself to fill in the story. "Where do you sleep, Toby?" He looked at the floor. "Truck's not so bad." She said nothing for a moment. Then she said, "I'm reopening the station. I need somebody who can turn a wrench." He looked at her steadily. He had the eyes of a young man who had been offered things before, and almost all of them had cost him. "You don't know me," he said. "You just replaced that hose faster than most mechanics with twice your experience. That's enough for today." He did not say yes. He did not say no. He poured coolant into the radiator, started the engine, and listened to it run. Listened the way Harlan used to listen. Satisfied, he closed the hood and wiped his hands on a rag from the bench. "I'll think about it," he said. "Come back tomorrow if you decide," she said. "I'll have coffee on." He came back the next morning at 7. Lorraine was already on the apron sweeping. She did not say anything when his truck pulled in. She handed him a mug. He took it. He drank it without asking what was in it. "1 week," he said. "See how it goes." Fair enough. And that was the beginning of it. They worked. They worked in the way that people work when there is no other choice and no other plan, in the way that her father had worked, in the way that the men and women of those mountains had always worked when winter was coming. Toby took the bay. He went through the tools, cleaned them, hung them back on the pegboard inside the black outlines Harlan had drawn with a marker 40 years ago. He tested the compressor. He bled the lines on the hydraulic lift. He found 2 birds' nests in the furnace. Flew pulled them out without commentary and got the heat working again on the 3rd try. Lorraine took the front. She finished the windows. She inventoried what was left on the shelves. She wrote out in her father's old paper ledger what the station would carry when it opened, and she wrote out in another column the prices she would charge for it. The numbers in the second column were not generous to herself. They were not generous to her bottom line. They were the prices Harlan would have charged, adjusted for inflation, the way Harlan would have adjusted them. Wendell came almost every morning. He brought lumber, he brought tools, he brought once a set of new hinges for the back door because the old ones had been rusted shut for a decade. He never asked to be paid. Lorraine tried on the 3rd morning, and he looked at her with such honest insult that she did not try again. "Your daddy reshingled my roof in '98, Wendell said. 3 days of work, wouldn't take a dime. Told me I could buy him a steak when I won the lottery." He hammered a nail into the new porch step he was setting. "Never won the lottery, so this is the steak." The first customer came on a Thursday in late April. An older woman in a white sedan pulled up to the pump island, rolled down her window, and stared at Lorraine for a long, suspended moment. "Are you open?" the woman asked. "We are." The woman got out of her car slowly with both hands on the door frame for balance. She looked at the building. She looked at the new green paint on the door. She looked at Lorraine and her eyes filled. "I used to come here every week when Harlan was alive," she said. "He always checked my tires, never charged me." She pressed a hand to her mouth. "I didn't expect anyone to be here." Lorraine pumped her gas. She checked her tires. When the woman reached for her wallet to pay for the tire check, Lorraine waved her off. The woman looked at the wave and her eyes filled again. "Your daddy did the same thing," she whispered. "Exact same wave." After that, the customers came steadily. Not many, but enough. People who lived in the valley and remembered the station when it was Harlan's, and people who had heard in the slow telegraph by which mountain news travels that the daughter was back. They came for gas, and they stayed for the porch. A man in his 70s brought a checkerboard one afternoon and left it on the porch railing. Within a week, there was a tournament that nobody kept official score of, but everybody took seriously. The bay stayed busy. Toby was good, he was better than good, and Lorraine watched with a quiet recognition as the boy who had walked into her station with nothing began week by week to stand a little straighter. She gave him the spare room upstairs. He resisted the way young men resist anything that costs them their pride, and then on a cold night in early May, she came down the stairs and found him asleep in the cab of his truck, and the next morning she told him that was the last time, and he did not argue. He carried his small duffel bag up the narrow staircase and laid it on the floor beside the second-hand mattress she had bought him at a yard sale, and he did not say thank you, because she had never wanted that, and he knew it. The first crack in the new life came in the middle of May. It came in a long white envelope, hand-delivered by a courier in a black sedan who did not get out of the car. He left the envelope wedged between the screen door and the jamb. Lorraine found it when she opened up at 6. The return address read, Hartwell and Associates. She opened it at the counter. Her hands did not shake, although the part of her that watched her hands was surprised that they did not. She read the letter twice. Roland was filing a motion to reopen the asset division. His attorneys claimed that the gas station had been undervalued during settlement, that Lorraine had failed to disclose information regarding a planned expansion of Interstate 81 that would route a new exit within 1.5 miles of the property, and that the corresponding rise in land value materially altered the equitable distribution of marital assets. They were asking the court either to award Roland his share or to force a sale. There was a second page. Lorraine read it more slowly. The second page identified by name a witness Roland's team intended to call, Cyrus Hollings, the man who had kept Harlan's books for the last 6 years of his life, the man Harlan had loaned $1,200 in 2009 to cover his wife's prescriptions, the man Harlan had written about in the journal under the simple entry, C. Hollings 1200, do not collect. Roland's people had Cyrus Hollings, and Cyrus Hollings was prepared to testify that the maintenance, repair, and operational funds for Pruitt Gas and Service had originated from a joint marital account between Lorraine and Roland Hadley, making the station, in legal effect, marital property. It was a lie, a clean, calculated, well-coached lie. Lorraine set the letter down on the counter beside her father's reading glasses. She stood looking at it for a long time. She did not cry. The crying was finished. What she felt instead was something narrow and cold sliding into place behind her sternum, like a wedge being driven into wood. Roland had not just decided to take her station. He had decided to do it by corrupting one of the men her father had quietly saved. That afternoon, while Toby was under a truck in the bay, his shoulders to the concrete and his work boots sticking out into the slanted light from the open door, the cash drawer in the front of the station was found short. $642 missing. Lorraine had counted it the night before. She had counted it that morning. She counted it again, standing at the counter with the drawer pulled out into her hand, and she counted slowly the way you count when you do not want the answer. Wendell was on the porch when she stepped outside. $642, she said. Wendell looked at her. Then he looked at the bay. You don't think, she said. I don't think anything, Wendell said. He was a careful man. He was a man who, when he did not know, did not pretend. But that boy has a record. He has a record from when he was 19. Lorraine. I know what the record is, she said. Her voice was even. He told me before I hired him. Driving under the influence. 4 months. He served it. He's been straight ever since. All right. I'm not asking him about the money. Wendell looked at her for a long second. Then he nodded once, very slowly, and he went back to his coffee. She did not ask Toby. She did not mention it. That night she closed up early. She turned off the lights at the regular time. She locked the front door from the inside, with Toby already upstairs in his room. She climbed the back staircase quietly and lay on her own bed in her clothes, and she waited. She had a kitchen knife from the drawer beside her hand. She did not think she would need it. She did not put it down. At 2 a.m, she heard a sound at the front door. She came down the back staircase in her stocking feet. She moved through the dark station without turning on any lights, because she knew where everything was, every counter and every shelf, the way her father had known. She crouched behind the front counter with the knife in her right hand and her left hand on the floor for balance, and she listened to the front door click softly open. A flashlight beam swept the room. A man stepped inside. He was alone. He was in his 30s, lean, in a dark hooded jacket, and he closed the door behind him with the quiet competence of someone who had broken into other people's buildings before. He moved toward the cash register. He did not see her. The flashlight beam swept past her head and away. Lorraine stood up. She switched on the desk lamp on the counter with her left hand, and she lifted the knife into the light with her right. "Don't," she said. The man froze. The flashlight clattered to the counter. "Hands where I can see them." He raised his hands. She could see his face now, thin, tight, frightened in a way she had not expected. He looked at the knife. He looked at her. He looked at the front door, and she saw him calculate the distance and decide against it. "Sit down," she said. He sat down on the wooden stool in front of the counter. "Who paid you?" He did not answer. His mouth worked. "Who paid you to come in here last week and take the money out of my drawer?" Lorraine said. "Who paid you to come back tonight and do it again?" He did not answer. Lorraine took the kitchen knife and she set it down very deliberately on the counter between them. She did not put it away. She left it where he could see it. Then she reached under the counter and she came up with the cell phone she had bought at a gas station in Lexington 2 weeks ago. She turned on the video camera. She set the phone on the counter pointed at the man's face with the red recording dot, small and steady, in the corner of the screen. "This is your one chance," she said. "You tell me who paid you. You leave my station. You don't come back. You don't come within 10 miles of this mountain, and I don't call the sheriff." He looked at the phone. He looked at her. "You don't call the sheriff," he said. "Promise." "I promise." He swallowed. "Some guy out of Richmond," he said. "Suit, older, maybe 50, 60, gave me a name, said it didn't matter. 3,000 cash up front, another 3 when the place closed." When the place closed. His words. "He told you to keep coming back," Lorraine said. "He said to come back until you sold." "What's the name he gave you?" The man swallowed again. "Hadley," he said. The word landed in the small lit space between them, and it did not move. Lorraine looked at the phone for a long second. The red dot was still steady. The audio was clean. "Get up," she said. He stood up. His knees buckled, and he caught himself on the counter. "Walk to the door. Open it slowly. Get in your car. Drive south on Route 11, and do not stop until you are out of this county. If I see your face on this mountain again, I will use this video. Do you understand?" "Yes, ma'am." "Go." He went. The door closed behind him. She heard a car start up somewhere down the apron and pull away with the headlights off. Lorraine sat down on the stool he had vacated. She did not lower the knife for a long minute. The phone kept recording. She finally reached out and stopped it, and she watched the file save into the storage with a small, polite chime. She listened to the building. The building was quiet. Upstairs, in the spare room, she heard Toby turn over in his sleep. He did not know. He had not heard. He had been here in this building sleeping under her roof, while a man in a Richmond suit had been paying another man to come in the dark and steal from him by name and frame him for it. She set the knife on the counter beside the phone. She put both hands flat on the wood. She looked at her father's reading glasses and his unfinished crossword and the green painted door he had painted with his own hands, and she felt the wedge that had slid in behind her sternum that morning settle deeper. She would not crawl. She had not been crawling. She had been crouching in the dark with a kitchen knife in her hand, waiting for a man Roland had sent into her father's building, and she had been quiet, and she had been steady, and she had been waiting. The woman who had signed her divorce papers with a bad pen had been crouching in the dark of her own life for 33 years. She had not known it. She knew it now. Lorraine stood up. She walked to the window. The eastern sky was starting to gray. Somewhere down the mountain, a rooster was telling the world what time it was, and the world was not listening. She would not crawl. She would not sell. She picked up her father's reading glasses and she cleaned them on the hem of her shirt, and she set them back on the counter, and the headlights of an early morning truck swept past the front window, slowed at the granite outcrop, and disappeared up the road. The phone with the video on it sat between her hands. The red dot was off now, but the file was there. The file would still be there in the morning. The file would still be there when Roland Hadley's lawyers stood up in a Goshen County courtroom and tried to take her father's station out from under her. The file would still be there when she needed it. It was not enough. It was a start. 2 days later, a rental car came up Route 11 and turned into the apron. A woman got out of the driver's seat. She stood for a long moment beside the open door, looking at the building. She was 32 years old. Her hair was the same color Lorraine's had been at 32. She was wearing a white blouse and tailored pants and the wrong shoes for this gravel. Lorraine stepped out onto the porch. "Hi, Mom," said her daughter. Lorraine did not move from the porch. She put one hand on the new pine railing Wendell had built her, and she watched Bridget walk up the apron in those wrong shoes, slowly looking at the station the way a person looks at a place they have been arguing about in their head for weeks. Bridget stopped at the bottom of the steps. "I came to ask you to sell," she said. "I know." "I'm not asking anymore." She climbed the steps. She put her arms around her mother and she held on the way a daughter holds her mother when she has been wrong and outside in the cool May morning on the cracked apron of Pruitt Gas and Service, with the mountains laid out in folds of green and blue. Behind them, Lorraine Hadley closed her eyes and held her daughter, and somewhere inside her chest, the wedge that had slid in 2 nights before shifted just a 1/4 inch to make room for something else. Bridget pulled back. She was crying. She wiped her face with the heel of her hand. "I have to tell you something," she said, "about Dad, about something I found." Lorraine looked at her. "Come inside," she said. "I'll pour you a cup." Bridget set the manila envelope on the counter beside Harlan's reading glasses. She did not open it. She slid it toward her mother with 2 fingers, the way a person slides bad news, and she watched Lorraine's face. "I've been looking for 6 months," Bridget said. Her voice was steady, the way her mother's was steady. She had not inherited many things from Lorraine, but the steadiness when she needed it was one of them. "I hired somebody, a man in Charlottesville. I paid him out of my own savings. I didn't tell anyone." Lorraine did not touch the envelope. "How long?" she said. 11 years. The number landed in the small lit space behind the counter, and it did not move. Lorraine put both hands flat on the wood, the way she had done 2 nights before when a man had sat where her daughter was sitting now and confessed to a name. She looked at her daughter's face. Bridget was 32. She had been 21 when this had started. She had been a girl in college calling home on Sunday afternoons while her father, 2 states away, had been beginning a separate life that nobody at the dinner table had known existed. "Her name is Marisol Vega," Bridget said. "She lives in Reston. She's 38. She is a paralegal at a firm Dad does business with. They have a son. He was born in 2017. His name is Mateo. He is 9 years old. 9 years old." Lorraine thought of the photographs of Roland in the years between 2017 and 2026. Roland holding a Christmas glass. Roland on a sailboat off the Outer Banks. Roland at Bridget's college graduation, his arm around Lorraine's shoulders, smiling for the camera. In every photograph, he had been somewhere on the other side of the state, a father to a child she had never been told existed. "Open it," she said. Bridget opened the envelope. There were photographs, receipts, a school enrollment form on which the father's name was listed as Roland Hadley, and a phone number was listed that Lorraine recognized as the one Roland had taken to using for business calls in late 2016. There was a copy of a deed to a small condominium in Reston purchased in 2018 in Marisol Vegas, name paid for, with a wire transfer from an account in Roland's name, only an account that had not appeared on any document submitted during the divorce. There was a letter from a private school in Fairfax County thanking Mr. Hadley for his most recent tuition payment of $19,400 for the upcoming academic year. Lorraine looked at the documents for a long time. She did not pick them up. She did not move them. She did not even put her finger on them. She had been steady through worse than this in the last 6 weeks. She would be steady through this. What she felt looking down at the paper trail of her husband's second life was not heartbreak. It was something flatter, something more useful. It was the quiet recognition of a piece of evidence she had needed without knowing she needed it. Roland had not just despised her. Roland had been hiding a child while he was sitting at her dining room table. Bridget was watching her. "Mom!" Lorraine raised her eyes. "I am not going to cry about this," she said. "I am not going to use it the way you think I might use it. I do not need this in order to hate your father." She paused. "I need it to protect myself." She slid the envelope back to her daughter. "Put this somewhere safe. Make a copy. Put the copy in a different safe place. If anything happens to me, you bring it out. Not before, not unless I tell you. Are we clear?" Bridget nodded. "Mom, yes. I am sorry I told you to sell this place." "I know you are," Lorraine said. "It's all right." Bridget stayed 3 days. She slept in the spare room across from Toby's in a single bed with a quilt Lorraine's mother had stitched in 1971. She put her tailored pants away in her duffel bag on the second morning and borrowed a pair of jeans from her mother that did not quite fit, and she helped Lorraine carry firewood to the porch, and on the second afternoon, she stood in the bay and watched her mother explain to a teenage boy from down the mountain how to read a tire tread. She had not seen her mother in a place where her mother knew things in a very long time. She watched the boy's face as he listened. She watched her mother's hands. When she drove away on the 4th morning, Bridget held on at the open car door for a second longer than she meant to. "Call me after the hearing," she said. "I will. Whatever happens. Whatever happens." The introduction came 2 days later. Wendell brought it himself in the form of a phone number, written on the back of a feed store receipt. "Lawyer," he said. He set the receipt on the counter. "Retired. Lives in Barton, about 40 miles up the mountain. Her name is Adelaide Vance. She practiced for 30 years out of Richmond. Then she came up here in 2018 because her husband died, and she needed not to be in Richmond anymore." Lorraine looked at the number. "Why this one?" she said. Wendell turned his coffee mug in his hands. "Your daddy paid for her little girl's surgery in 1992, he said. Heart valve. Adelaide didn't have the money. The insurance wouldn't cover it. The money showed up at the surgeon's office in a plain envelope marked for the Vance child. Your daddy did it through a doctor in Lexington who didn't ask questions. Adelaide spent 20 years trying to find out who. She never did. I told her 2 years ago after I was sure. She just sat there for a long time and she didn't say anything." Lorraine called the number. A woman with a calm Virginia voice answered on the second ring. "Mrs. Hadley," she said before Lorraine had finished saying her own name. "Wendell told me you would call. Can you come up the mountain on Friday?" Adelaide Vance was a tall woman in her late 60s with a back as straight as a fence post and reading glasses on a thin gold chain. She arrived in a gray sedan on the Friday afternoon, and she walked up to the porch with the unhurried gait of a woman who had walked into harder rooms than this one for most of her adult life. She held out her hand to Lorraine. Her grip was dry and very firm. "I have not stood in front of a judge in 7 years, she said. "I want you to know that before we go any further. If you want a different attorney, I will help you find one, and I will pay for the first 3 hours myself." I don't want a different attorney, Lorraine said. All right, Adelaide said. Then we are going to do this very carefully. They sat at the counter for 3 hours. Adelaide read the motion. She read it again. She made notes on a yellow pad in a small, exact handwriting that reminded Lorraine with a small pang of her father's. She asked Lorraine for the original deed. Lorraine brought it out. She asked for Harlan's will. Lorraine brought that out. She asked for the tax records. Lorraine brought out the small stack of past due notices from the county that she had been letting pile up in a kitchen drawer for years. Adelaide set her reading glasses on the counter. Your husband has hired a witness, Cyrus Hollings. Yes, my father loaned him $1,200 in 2009 and never asked for it back. I am aware. I read the journal entry last night. Adelaide tapped the yellow pad. Mrs. Hadley, this motion is not a strong one. On the law, your husband has almost nothing. The property passed to you through your father's will. It was never jointly held. It was never improved with marital funds. You have not paid taxes on it from a joint account because you have not paid taxes on it from any account. Your husband never set foot on this property in 33 years. His own attorneys appraised it during the divorce and let you keep it without argument. But the witness changes the texture. A motion this thin will usually be dismissed on the papers, with Cyrus Hollings testifying that maintenance and operational funds came out of a joint marital account. The judge will want to hear it in open court. Your husband's people are not trying to win on the law. They are trying to win on pressure. They are betting that you will fold rather than sit through a hearing. I am not going to fold. I know you are not. Adelaide picked up her reading glasses. I am going to do something for you that I have not done for a client in a very long time. I am going to take this case. I am not going to charge you. Wendell has explained to me why. I can pay. You cannot, but it does not matter because I am not asking. Adelaide put the glasses on. There is one thing I want you to understand. I am going to stand beside you. I am not going to stand for you. When the time comes, you are going to take that witness stand yourself, and you are going to look the judge in the eye, and you are going to tell him about your father, about this station, about what was taken from you and what was not. Are we clear? Yes. All right. Tell me about the man you caught in here at 2 a.m, Lorraine told her. Adelaide listened without interrupting. When Lorraine was done, Adelaide asked to see the phone. Lorraine brought it out. They watched the video together at the counter. The small lit face of the man in the dark hooded jacket saying the name Hadley, and Adelaide did not blink. This is admissible, Adelaide said. Barely. It is going to require a very careful chain of custody. We are going to make a copy on a thumb drive tonight. 2 copies. One stays with you, one stays with me. Do you understand? Yes. Good. I will see you in court. She left in the late afternoon. The gray sedan disappeared around the curve, and Lorraine stood on the porch for a long time, watching the trees take back the road. The week before, the hearing went very slowly and also too fast. Lorraine pumped gas. She made coffee. She wrote out a small order for spark plugs that came in on a Tuesday and that she paid for in cash from the register because the register was making enough money now to do that. Toby worked in the bay. Wendell came by every morning. On Wednesday, Lorraine drove to the bank in Lexington to make a deposit, and when she came back to the truck in the bank parking lot, she sat with both hands on the steering wheel for a long minute, and she thought she might be sick. She was not. She drove home. On Thursday night, Wendell came up onto the porch at sunset with something wrapped in a folded handkerchief. He sat down on the bench across from her. He set the handkerchief on the small table between them, and he unfolded it. Inside was a single brass key. Your daddy gave me this 12 years ago, Wendell said. About 6 months before he died. He told me to hold on to it. He told me in his exact words that I was to give it to you only if you proved you deserved it. He looked at her. He wouldn't tell me what it opened. He wouldn't tell me where. He said when the day came, I would know. Lorraine looked at the key. I think the day has come, Wendell said. He slid a small white card across the table. There was an address on the card, written in her father's careful block letters. First Virginia Bank and Trust, Lexington, Box 412. He set this up the year your mother died, Wendell said. 16 years ago, he told me he was getting his affairs in order. He told me he was making sure that if a certain thing happened, a certain other thing would be ready to happen. What certain thing? He didn't say. He just told me to watch. Lorraine looked at the key for a long time. He knew, she said. He suspected, Wendell said. Your daddy was a careful man. He saw what he saw. He just gave you the time to see it for yourself. She picked up the key. The brass was warm from the inside of Wendell's pocket. Tomorrow, she said, I'll drive you. She drove herself. She had decided that on the way upstairs to sleep. Whatever was in Box 412 at the First Virginia Bank and Trust, she was going to walk into that vault alone, and she was going to open that box alone, and she was going to look at it alone, the way her father had set it up, alone 16 years ago in a town 40 miles from where she had been living her quiet, agreeable life. The bank in Lexington had marble floors and a teller who recognized the name on the box without checking the computer. A young woman led her down a flight of stairs and into a small room with a wall of metal doors, and she pulled the long, narrow box out of its slot, and she set it on the table in the private viewing room, and she closed the door behind her. Lorraine sat down. The room was very quiet. She put the key into the lock, and she turned it. Inside the box were 3 things. The first was an envelope thick and heavy, bound with a paper bank wrapper. She lifted it out. She slit the top with her thumbnail. Inside was cash, hundreds, bound in clean stacks. She did not count it in the bank. She would count it in the truck. Her hands knew already by weight that she was holding more money than she had ever held in her life. The second was a stiff blue folder. She opened it. The top sheet was a deed recorded in the Goshen County Clerk's office on November 9th, 2010. 15 acres of farmland adjoining the southern boundary of Pruitt Gas and Service, purchased from a man named Royden Tarp. Recorded value at the time of purchase, $22,500. The deed was made out sole owner to Lorraine Ann Hadley. She had been 38 years old in November of 2010. She had been living in a house on Briar Creek Lane. She had been hosting a Thanksgiving dinner for her husband's brother in 3 weeks. She had not known her name was on a deed in a clerk's office 4 hours away. The third thing in the box was a single folded sheet of yellow legal paper, her father's handwriting. October 12, 2010. Sweetheart, I bought this land last week. I bought it because Royden Tarp told me over coffee at the diner in Goshen that he had heard from his cousin who works in the planning office in Roanoke that the state was going to expand Interstate 81 over the next 20 years, and they were going to put a new exit ramp 3/4 of a mile from this station. He told me I should buy the Tarp pasture. He told me the price was going to look foolish in 15 years. I did not buy it for myself. I am 74 years old. I am not going to be here in 15 years. I bought it for you. Your name is on the deed. It has always been on the deed. I never told you because I did not want it tangled up in what you were tangled up in. I knew the day was going to come when you were going to need something that was yours and yours alone, something that no man could touch. That day is the day Wendell hands you the key. I love you, sweetheart. Be careful with this. Tell the right people. Do not tell the wrong ones. Dad. Lorraine read the letter twice. She folded it. she put it back in the box. She drove back up the mountain with $87,000 in cash in a paper grocery bag on the passenger seat and the deed to 15 acres of pasture on the floorboard at her feet. And somewhere around the third switchback, she pulled the Ford over onto the gravel shoulder, and she put her forehead on the steering wheel, and she sat there for a long time breathing. She did not cry. The crying was finished. But she sat there for 10 minutes with the engine running and the morning sun coming in through the windshield, and she let her father be in the truck with her one more time. She thought of him at the diner in Goshen in 2010, drinking bad coffee out of a heavy ceramic cup, listening to a farmer tell him about an interstate that was going to come through in 15 years. She thought of him driving down to the courthouse alone, paying $22,500 out of an account she had never seen, writing her name on a deed without telling her. She thought of him driving home up Route 11, past this very granite outcrop, knowing that he had just bought something for a daughter who in 2010 would have refused it. He had not refused her the time to find her own way back. He had simply made sure that when she did, there would be ground under her feet that no one could take. Lorraine lifted her head from the steering wheel. She put the Ford in gear. She drove home. The hearing was set for the second Wednesday in August. Lorraine wore a navy blue dress she had bought at a consignment shop in Lexington for $38. She wore her mother's small pearl earrings. She wore the boots she had been wearing every day at the station because she had worked too hard in those boots to put on heels for a man like Roland. Roland was there. He sat in the front row of the gallery with Hartwell beside him. He was wearing a charcoal suit that fit him too well, and the watch she remembered. His hair had gone whiter in the 4 months since she had last seen him at the station. He did not look at her when she walked in. Adelaide Vance walked beside her. The courtroom in Goshen County was small. The walls were paneled in dark wood. A ceiling fan turned slowly above the bench. The judge was a man in his 60s, with a face that had heard too many stories to be surprised by any of them, and he opened the proceeding with the dry, efficient courtesy of a man who did not have time for cleverness. Hartwell stood up. He laid out his case the way she remembered him, laying out her divorce settlement in clean, smooth sentences that sounded reasonable until you looked at the floor underneath them. He spoke about marital assets. He spoke about equitable distribution. He spoke about a planned highway expansion that was about to materially increase the value of the property in question. He spoke about funds drawn from a joint marital account that had been used over the course of the marriage to maintain the property's operational status. He called Cyrus Hollings to the stand. Cyrus Hollings was a thin man in his late 50s who walked to the witness stand the way a man walks toward a thing he has agreed to but no longer wants to do. He took the oath. He sat down. He did not look at Lorraine. Hartwell led him through his testimony in careful, smooth questions. Yes, he had kept the books for Harlan Pruitt's operation in the years before Harlan died. Yes, he had been familiar with the operational accounts. Yes, in his recollection, certain repair and maintenance expenses had been drawn from an account he had understood to be a joint marital account between Lorraine and Roland Hadley. Adelaide rose for cross-examination. She did not raise her voice. She walked to the witness stand without notes. She set both hands on the wooden rail. She looked at Cyrus Hollings for a long second until he looked back at her. "Mr. Hollings," she said, "in November of 2009, did you accept a loan of $1,200 from Harlan Pruitt to cover prescription costs for your late wife?" Cyrus Hollings opened his mouth. He closed it. "Yes," he said. "Did Mr. Pruitt ever ask you to repay that loan?" "No." "Are you aware that you are listed in his personal journal by name under an instruction that read in his own handwriting, 'Do not collect'?" "I am aware now." "Were you aware at the time in 2009 that you were not expected to repay him? A long pause. Yes. Mr. Hollings, in June of this year, were you contacted by an attorney representing Mr. Roland Hadley? Yes. Were you offered any form of compensation in exchange for your testimony today? A longer pause. My legal fees were going to be covered. Your legal fees. Yes. Mr. Hollings, were you offered anything else? He looked at his hands. There was a consulting agreement, he said. $18,000 to be paid after the proceeding. The courtroom did not move. Hartwell did not move. Roland did not move. Adelaide did not change her tone. Mr. Hollings, did Harlan Pruitt's operational accounts at any point in your tenure as his bookkeeper receive deposits from any account belonging to Roland Hadley or held jointly with Lorraine Hadley? No. To your direct knowledge, did funds from any marital account between Roland and Lorraine Hadley ever flow into the maintenance or operation of Pruitt Gas and Service? Cyrus Hollings looked at Lorraine for the first time. No, he said. I am sorry, no. Adelaide returned to her seat. Hartwell tried to recover. He could not. His next witness was a county appraiser who spoke about projected land values along the I-81 corridor, and the testimony was technically correct and entirely useless because the question of whether the land was going to appreciate was a different question from the question of whether the land was marital, and the judge knew the difference. Lorraine took the stand. She told him about her father. She told him about the deed transferred from her grandfather to Harlan in 1971 and from Harlan to her in 2014. She told him about the years between 1993 and 2014 during which her husband had never once set foot on the property. She told him that her father had paid the taxes himself until his death, and that the past due notices since 2014 had been issued to her personally and ignored by her personally, and that no joint account she had ever shared with Roland Hadley had at any time been used to pay a single dollar of any expense related to Pruitt Gas and Service. She paused. Then she said one more thing. Your Honor, on a night in May of this year, a man entered my station at 2 a.m. with the intent to remove the cash from the register. I detained him. I recorded his statement on a cellular telephone. He stated on that recording that he had been paid by a man in Richmond in a suit who provided him with the name Hadley to enter my business repeatedly and remove money in order to pressure me to sell the property to my former husband. The courtroom changed temperature. Adelaide stood. She entered the thumb drive into evidence with the care of a woman who had been waiting for exactly this moment. The judge watched the video on a laptop the bailiff brought up to the bench. The recording was 38 seconds long. It was very clean. The man's face was clearly lit. His voice was clear. The name Hadley landed in the wood-paneled courtroom as cleanly as it had landed in the dark of Lorraine's station 3 months before. The judge took off his reading glasses. He looked at Roland. He looked at Hartwell. He set his glasses on the bench. Motion denied, he said. The property at Route 11, Goshen County, recorded as Pruitt Gas and Service, was the separate property of Harlan Robert Pruitt at the time of his death in 2014, was conveyed by valid will to Lorraine Ann Hadley, was never commingled with any marital asset of Lorraine and Roland Hadley, and is not subject to redistribution. This matter is closed. He paused. Mr. Hartwell, Your Honor, you will remain in this courtroom. I am going to ask the bailiff to call the Commonwealth's attorney. We are going to have a separate conversation about Mr. Hollings, Mr. Hadley, and the recording your client's representative caused to be made admissible by his own conduct. Mr. Hartwell, I will note for the record that I have known you for 19 years, and I am profoundly disappointed. Hartwell sat down. He did not stand up again. Outside on the courthouse steps in the August sun, Lorraine stood on the bottom step for a long minute, the breath going in and out of her in a way she could feel. Adelaide stood beside her without speaking. Then Adelaide put one hand very briefly on Lorraine's elbow. "Your daddy would have liked that," she said, and she walked away across the parking lot to her gray sedan. Lorraine drove home. The criminal case took longer, 6 weeks, then 10, then 12. Roland was charged with witness tampering and conspiracy to commit fraud. The Commonwealth's attorney's office, with Adelaide quietly making phone calls in the background, expanded the investigation into Roland's business filings, and a federal agent in Richmond opened a separate matter on irregularities in his tax returns going back 6 years. His license to broker real estate in the Commonwealth of Virginia was suspended pending the outcome. The woman in Reston disappeared from the photographs his daughter found of him on social media. The son in Fairfax County stayed. In late October, Roland came up the mountain. Lorraine saw the silver SUV from the porch. She did not stand up. He got out of the car. He walked across the apron the way a man walks when he is not sure his legs will hold him. He had lost weight. The tan was gone. The watch was gone. He climbed the porch steps, and he stood at the top of them with his hands at his sides, and Lorraine looked at him over the rim of her coffee cup. "Lorraine, Roland, I came to ask you," he said. "I came to ask if you would consider withdrawing the civil claim for damages, the defamation. You came to ask. Yes, you came to ask me to withdraw a claim against you. You, after what you sent into this building. You, after 11 years in Reston. You, after you told Drew Pickering I would crawl back in 6 months." Roland's mouth opened. It did not close cleanly. She looked at him. She set the coffee cup down on the small table beside her chair. She did not stand up. She did not need to stand up. "You said I was going to starve," she said. "It has been 8 months, Roland. I have never eaten better." She pointed at the steps. He looked at her for 1 second more. Then he went down the steps, and he walked across the apron, and he got into the silver SUV, and he drove down Route 11 and around the granite outcrop, and Lorraine Hadley, 58 years old, picked up her coffee cup and took a long, slow drink, and she watched him go. She did not withdraw the claim. In April of the following year, the Dogwoods came up the mountain. Lorraine opened the station every morning at 6. The coffee maker by the door stayed on until somebody, usually Wendell, turned it off after dark. Toby ran the bay. He had finished his certification course in February, sitting at the counter after hours with a used laptop and the same composition book he had been writing in since June, and the certificate now hung in a cheap black frame above the workbench beside the pegboard Harlan had outlined in 1974. Toby did not look at it often. He did not need to. He knew it was there. In late April, Delphine Merrick came up Route 11 in a 1998 Buick, driven slowly by a grandson who was not Toby. She was 78 years old. She was a small woman with white hair pulled back in a clip and the hands of someone who had worked her whole life. She climbed out of the Buick on the apron with the help of a cane, and she stood looking at the building for a long moment, the way Wendell had stood, the way the woman in the white sedan had stood that first Thursday in April, a year ago. Lorraine came out onto the porch. Delphine looked up at her. "My grandson told me," Delphine said, "that I would find an answer here." Lorraine came down the steps. She took the older woman's hand. She did not say anything. She led Delphine into the station behind the counter, and she lifted from the shelf beneath the register the small green folder marked Merrick in Harlan's careful block letters. She set the folder on the counter. She opened it. She turned it so that Delphine could read the single page inside. Delphine read it. She read it again. Then she put her face in her hands and she stood very still for a long time, with her shoulders shaking and no sound coming out, and Lorraine, who had not been ready to cry through any of this, stood beside her at the counter and put one hand on the small of her back and held her up. After a while, Delphine straightened. 40 years, she said. He never wanted you to know. I am glad I know. They sat on the porch together for an hour. They drank coffee. They did not say very much. Toby came up the apron in his work shirt, and his grandmother stood up and put her arms around him and held on, and Toby, who had been carrying the secret for almost a year, finally let it down. Bridget came in June. She brought the children. The boy was 9. The girl was 6. They climbed out of the rental car in their city clothes, and they stood on the gravel apron, and they looked at the station and at the mountains and at the gravel itself, and Lorraine came down off the porch and met them with her hands on her hips and a small smile, and the boy looked up at her and said, "It's small." "Big enough," Lorraine said. She took them through the station. She let them ring up a pretend sale on the mechanical register. She took them out to the bay. She lifted the boy up so that he could see the pegboard with all the wrenches and sockets and screwdrivers hanging inside their outlined shapes. She handed him a tire gauge. She showed him how. He pressed it to the valve stem of the truck parked in the bay. He read the number. He looked up at her. 32, he said. "Perfect," she said. "Your great-grandfather taught me to do that when I was 9 years old, with this same tool." The boy looked at the gauge in his hand. He looked at the workbench. He looked at his great-grandfather's pegboard, and he looked at his grandmother. "Show me another one," he said. She showed him another one. In the bay door, Bridget stood with both arms crossed over her chest. She was crying without trying to hide it. She did not say anything. She just watched her son and her mother in the slanted light of the open door, and she understood for the first time what her grandfather had built. That afternoon, a green minivan came up Route 11 with a cracked taillight and a young woman at the wheel and 3 children in the back. The youngest was asleep in a car seat. The woman pulled up to the pump island and got out slowly, the way tired mothers get out of cars, and she looked at the building and at Lorraine on the porch. "How much for $10 of regular?" she said. Lorraine came down the porch steps. She filled the tank, not $10, the whole tank. She checked the oil. She topped off the windshield fluid. She noticed the front left tire was low, and she added air without asking. When the pump clicked off, the young woman opened her purse and started digging through it, the way Lorraine had seen people dig through purses her whole life, the small frantic motions of a person counting what she has and hoping it will be enough. "Pay it next time you're through," Lorraine said. The young woman looked up. "What?" "Next time you drive through. You can pay then." "I can't just." "Sure you can. I'll be here." The young woman stared at her, her eyes filled. "Why?" she said. Lorraine smiled. "My father used to say the same thing," she said. The minivan pulled away. Lorraine watched it disappear around the granite outcrop. She walked back up to the porch. She sat down beside Bridget. Bridget did not say anything. She put her hand on her mother's hand, and she left it there. The sun started down behind the western ridge. The light turned gold, then copper, then the long blue of a mountain evening that has not yet decided to become night. Lorraine looked out across Route 11 at the trees and the ridge lines folding back into the distance, and she thought of her father in October of 2013 in this same building, sitting at the same counter where she now sat every morning writing her a letter she would not read for 13 years. She thought of him driving down to a clerk's office in 2010 with $22,500 in his pocket and her name in his head. She thought of him in 1992 slipping cash into an envelope for a child he would never meet. She thought of him in 1994 doing it again. She thought of him in 1981 writing in a leather journal for the first time on a Tuesday afternoon by the light of the same desk lamp she now turned on every morning at 6. Inside the station, Toby reached up and flipped the breaker switch marked sign in Harlan's careful block letters. Outside above the porch, the hand-painted letters lit up against the deepening sky. Pruitt Gas and Service. The paint was faded. The letters were not perfect. The sign was not new. It glowed against the blue evening with the soft, steady light of something that had been lit many times before and would be lit many times again. Lorraine Hadley, 58 years old, sat on her father's porch with her daughter beside her and watched the sign come on. The valley got dark around them. The light stayed.